All right, it is 6:01, so we'll go ahead and get started. If you have not yet already, be sure to go to dsuprog.club and sign into the meeting there. Click View Meeting. Let's see, do we have it live?
Yeah.
Try refreshing your page and clicking Join Meeting again. Otherwise, one of these two guys can help you out too.
Remember, I tried joining them.
But yeah.
Tells me to sign in, yeah.
Yep. Nick will take care of you there. So, and yeah, same for anyone else. If you have any questions, Nick can help you out. Yeah, we'll get started. So, talking about CSS today, we'll cover JavaScript for the past couple weeks. And so we're delving into the other realm of web development, it's CSS. And so what is CSS? CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheet. And what does it do? It styles HTML files, defines how elements should be displayed, so can change color, position, etc. We'll see some examples, and it's basically what makes our websites nice and pretty. So we will dive into like what the cascading part means, but the style sheet part of the abbreviation I think is pretty self-explanatory. So yeah. Why CSS? It's essential in order for our websites to look nice. For example, the DSU Prague Club website that you're on right now, without CSS, our website would look like this. So as you can see, CSS is definitely kind of a necessary evil per se. It's sometimes not the most fun language or thing to work with sometimes, depending on who you ask. It can be somewhat finicky sometimes, but it is definitely necessary to make websites presentable for the end user and able to navigate. How to CSS. Like I said, kind of a lot of trial and error. I mean, that kind of goes for any program or language, but it seems so, especially with CSS. Helpful tip is like if you're editing like a certain area of something, if you don't know if that change actually did something or if you're actually changing a certain aspect or element, if you like set the change to be like something big, like change the font size to big and red, it kind of helps you see what areas are actually being affected by this setting. And then W3 Schools there is a very helpful resource. I'd say that about 90% of what I learned in CSS was learned through the W3 Schools website. They've got a bunch of different topics covering all the different features and how to use them and implement them. One thing to note is that the links are a little bit goofy in the slides I have learned. So if you click on the link, either like right click and open a new tab or control click, otherwise it'll open it right there in the slide deck and it'll be a little bit hard to look at. So my apologies on that. So yeah, so attaching CSS to your HTML file. So if you don't know a whole lot of HTML, that's no need to worry. Basically, you have your opening and closing tags in HTML, and then everything in between those opening and closing tags is kind of your content. So inside the header of your content, the title defines like what the text appears like on like the little tab thing. So it'll say my website, and then you include this link. You specify that as a style sheet, and then you include the file path to whatever your CSS file is named. So in this example, the CSS file is named styles.css. And yeah, if your CSS file is located in a deeper, like in a folder or something like that, then you'd have to specify like, my folder / styles.css. So that would be how you attach it to HTML, and then outside of that, you can work everything in that CSS document. There's no other things you have to try and do to tie your HTML and CSS together. Like mentioned last week with JavaScript, you can do it all in that HTML document itself, but it can get kind of messy and gross that way. So if you only have like 1 or 2 things you want to edit via CSS, then that's a good alternative or a good option if you don't want to make a separate file. But if you're making more changes than that, it's much nicer to put it in its own CSS file. So one key concept in CSS is selectors. So you can kind of see right here, there's a bunch of different selectors here that each affect a different area of your HTML document. So the asterisk is kind of a universal selector, similar to if you've ever used like the asterisk in like a Linux command line prompt, like you know, you want to copy everything in your directory, you can do like cp asterisk and then wherever you want to copy it to. So universal selector will select every single element in your page and set those properties accordingly. So this, for example, sets the background color to every element so that it is black. H1 is an element selector. So an element selector contains like any of these tags like you saw down here. Body, H1, div, those are all considered elements, P, in HTML. And so whenever you have just H1 with no period or hashtag or anything like that in front of it, it signifies that you are selecting an element to edit everything of that property. So every header 1 element in the CSS will be changed to the color red and it will be underlined. And then we have what are classes, which is denoted by a period in front. And classes are defined, looking at our HTML again, just write in that div tag, or it can be in your p tag. Any of these tags, you can put a class or an ID here to specify what that region is, and it helps you kind of define various regions in order to kind of make a universal property for a certain area. Like if you have a header with a navigation bar up top, you would have like a class that says like nav bar, and then all of your links and all that stuff would be in there, and then you'd use CSS and JavaScript to apply everything to that class, and then those IDs would be like your specific links like home, about us sort of thing. And so in CSS you can edit those specific properties. Like if you wanted home to be kind of a darker button and then all the other buttons are a little bit lighter, you can specify, you know, hashtag home and then make that background color like a little bit of a darker green, for example, and then the others are all just that standard green defined in your class. So as you can see here, our class is setting the my content class to white, so everything inside here, will have a white text, and then the specific text ID will be text aligned right here. So if we look at our result, we have that hello world that's red and underlined because that's an H1 header 1 tag. Our ID right there has a right aligned text, and then as you can see in that class, we have the class carries the responsibility of this white text color to both of these elements here in the class, but only the ID with text is right aligned. The other one in our class that does not have the text ID is not right aligned, but it's still white. So an important thing to know about CSS is that it's cascading, as I mentioned earlier. So what cascading means is that a property from like the top of the file will carry down all the way to all of its sub-elements. So, for example, if you had like that asterisk up there with the background color black, that applies to all the elements below it throughout the rest of the file. However, if you have a selector that has a higher specificity, that'll take higher precedence. And so specificity is defined as basically certain elements that you edit have higher precedence than others. So an element has a lower specificity than a class does. So if you have, as you see here, the color red applies to the entire body of our HTML file, but since a class has a higher specificity, it has higher priority, so it'll overwrite the color from being red to being green. And the same follows with IDs. IDs have a higher precedence. We'll use that word because specificity is hard to say 2,000 times. Has a higher precedence than a class does, and of course than an element does. So you can also have where you have like a class and then like a greater than symbol and then an ID, which means that anything that is in that class and has this ID will be edited. So you can have like a multiple things with an ID. Like say you had in your text here, you had an ID text, and then outside of this class, you had an ID text right here. If you have that class greater than ID, it says only elements with the ID of text that are a child of the myContent class are affected. And I apologize for not having an example of that in writing, something I should have added looking back now. But with that has a higher precedence than even just the standard ID here. And so that property will take over the text property. So if you had the ID text here and an ID text below, and you said myContent greater than text, and you set the color to be orange, only the ID text in here will be orange, and the ID text down here outside of this class will not be orange because it does not fall under the category of being a child of the myContent class. So anyway, going back to that specificity, you'll see, the ID has higher precedence in class than does the element. So when we look at that in our result, you can see that everything inside of our element of body starts out with red, like the H1 here, and then once class hits, everything in class changes to be green, and then anything with an ID of text changes to blue. So everything started out as red, then these two changed to the green, then this one changed to blue based off of its precedence. We'll go with that. So some browsers, specifically Internet Explorer, can be problematic. They don't support all the features that CSS has to offer. So that can sometimes be a pain when trying to design websites. Granted, IE is kind of reaching its end of support, end of life sort of thing. So it's not as big of an issue, but you can still have certain issues between like Chrome can handle this, but Firefox can't if you're using like a very brand new feature. So a really, really awesome website is caniuse.com. Here it is. And so in here you can do like text to line and see what different browsers support it. So you can see all of these here support it. Opera Mini, I don't know for sure what it's used for. I think like some like old mobile phones and stuff, but you'll find that Opera Mini can support like basically nothing when it comes to CSS and JavaScript and stuff. But yeah, as you can see, all of these support text-align, but it'll help you to see which versions do and don't support various things. So if you ever run into an issue where you use a property and you're confident that it's targeting the right area and the setting is the right setting and it won't change for whatever reason, this is a really awesome website to go and see, is it the browser that just can't handle that feature, or is there something wrong on my end? So there's a bunch of helpful resources, as I mentioned, with CSS. There's CSS-matic. That kind of helps you to, kind of step through all these. So CSSmatic has a bunch of awesome little tools that you can use to not have to do all the guess and check stuff sort of thing, to like set, like say you want a box shadow, so you have this little shadow for your box and you want to, you know, make it longer this way and blur it up a little bit and, you know, make it wider, sort of thing like that. So you can edit all these things, and as you can see in the text here, those numbers are changing for you, so that you can just go in, copy that, paste it into your CSS doc, and have this feature applied, so you don't have to do a bunch of different, like, you know, change this to 16 and then go check it in your browser, and then change it to 14 and then back up to 20, etc. So they have a nice handful of tools you can use for that. Noise, texture. That one doesn't look like it do anything. Border radius. You'll definitely have exposure to messing with borders, making things rounded and just putting, you know, boxes and stuff like that. So that's a very nice tool. And then, yeah, gradient generator, of course, as well. Getting all those things nice and pretty. So then CSS Diner is also kind of a interactive game sort of thing where you can, you know, go through and practice different, you know, type in a CSS selector and apply it. So, can't remember, you want to be able to select both of these plates here. And so you want to be able to type in something here that would, you know, like we want a class or table to select those plates, and then we'll get those selected, etc. Live demos aren't working on me, but.
You're selecting the table also, and it doesn't happen.
Yes. So we would go like, oop.
It might just want me to type plate. That's the simplest.
Yeah, just like that. I was getting too advanced. So, that's an example there. Will this one do table and then plate?
Doesn't want you to select the plate this time. It wants you to select the number next.
Oh, yeah, reading would help. So yeah, that's an example. I'll let y'all go through all of them. As you can see, it's been a little while since I've used this one. And then Flexbox Froggy. So a quick little tangent about Flexbox. Flexbox is a way to be able to kind of position your items throughout the page in a nice way, instead of having to like rely on, you know, exact coordinates with your pixels of like, you know, this is at exactly XY location. You can kind of have it so things are floating together in a nice format. And so Flexbox Froggy kind of helps you go through and learn the different features of Flexbox in order to kind of get things positioned together in a nice way. So that way you can have, like, for example, I made like a online game of like a little typing racer thing. And so I'd have like cars on top of a racetrack. Well, without Flexbox, like the car wouldn't really be able to sit on top of the racetrack very well. So I was able to use that to get everything lined up together in a nice, organized, and aligned format. And then once again, W3 Schools is a really awesome resource. It has a tutorial where it just kind of goes through each little thing. Like here's selectors that talk more about those selectors. It also has just a big old reference page down at the bottom here somewhere. References. So if you already like kind of have a basic understanding of CSS and you're just trying to remember what are the different options that I can use in CSS, this has a whole glossary of all the different features that you can use to edit a certain thing. So, you know, you can have a color, we already did, like columns, and like look and see how you can edit columns, or you can edit the cursor. So whenever your cursor is over a certain item, it can change, sort of thing. So W3 Schools is super awesome for CSS. And then, as you can see, there's a bunch of different languages here, but I've definitely used this one the most when trying to do CSS stuff. So, highly recommend that as well. So, any questions? It's kind of a shorter meeting today, but any thoughts or questions about anything?
So with the whole precedent specificity thing, what if I'm doing something la-di-da, and I want to make sure that something that's less specific actually has higher precedence? For example, if I have something that I want to apply to every div, and I have something more specific that's overriding a certain one, but I don't want it to do that, how can I do that? How can I make it so that the div always takes precedence?
So the question was, how can I make something that has less precedence still get that change that that would normally be overridden by a higher precedence thing defined in the CSS, basically. Just repeating it for the recording. So there's a couple different ways. There is a way where you can implement the important tag. That's not particularly advised. So if you do at the, let's see, if you had like your color green here and you put like a exclamation point important after that, that would make it so that it immediately has the highest precedence and that nothing else can override it. Like that is the highest thing. It's not usually recommended because it's kind of a band-aid solution and can break functionality for other things down the road. The other one would be, setting a ID if it's just a certain thing, setting an ID so that, although that kind of makes it higher precedence, but then defining it before or after, defining it after the certain words. So defining it at the bottom of your file will kind of give it that, because of that cascading element, if I remember right.
Yeah.
I might have bombed the answer to that question. But having it at the bottom of the CSS file will also give it that higher precedence, because as mentioned, CSS is cascading. So, unless otherwise noted, everything will be red. But if something else is noted later on down here, then it'll take the most recent instruction. And so if you want to have something like that specified, you can use that approach. Any other answer that you answers to that question?
No, I think you got them all.
So awesome. Well, if there are no other questions, we did want to announce that since it is the bi-weekly whatever, it's been 2 weeks since our last problem set. We have a new problem set up and running at competition.dsuprog.club. So once again, that'll be hosted on Caddis. There'll be 5 questions. And so just follow that link there, and we will have those problems right here. They'll be added there in a little bit once.
It opens at 7.
Yeah, it opens at 7, so they'll be there once the competition opens. And yeah, once again, gives you the chance to go through and build your programming skills and your competition strategy for upcoming competitions. I know DigiKey will be competing this Friday, so good luck to those teams. And then we'll have some other competitions coming up as well, ICPC and some other ones. So definitely, if you have time in your week at any point, sit down and take a look at some of the problems and just kind of get your feet wet that way, because it definitely helps in the end, to either learn more about a language that you're working in, or it gives you a chance to learn a new language if you want to go and try and learn Python or something. So outside of that, that's about it that I have for you guys today. So, yeah, we'll meet again here next week. Nick Sanderson will be talking about esoteric languages, which esoteric is, I don't know the actual definition, but
It's a programming language that doesn't actually have any real functional professional usage, but it's just kind of fun. For example, I'll be teaching you how to write a song that also finds prime numbers.
there you go. Writing a song to find prime numbers. Yeah, for the recording, Nick said that esoteric languages, languages that don't have like an actual practical use in the real world, they're just kind of fun languages. So we'll be covering that next week. Be on the lookout for chicken. That is my favorite esoteric language ever. So yeah, with that, we will call that a meeting. Thanks for coming, y'all.
Yeah, Nick.